Coming up tonight on the Hoosier Football Tailgate, the countdown to kickoff is on as the Indiana Hoosiers grind through fall camp. And I'm the coach, Shannon Griffith, and tonight we're diving into what Indiana must accomplish before squaring off against Michigan State, Wisconsin. I don't think it's Wisconsin, but Michigan State, Maryland. Games that are coming up after that gauntlet. We'll get all that taken care of here right after we get back here on the Hoosier Tailgate, right on thehoosier.com.
Walking them down. Woo! IU America. They got a football team now.
Hello, once again, everyone. I'm the coach, Shannon Griffith, and welcome to another edition of the Hoosier Football Tailgate. Let me correct my foul up there at the beginning and get you all slided away here for what we are covering tonight. After last week, we covered the gauntlet that Indiana will have with Iowa, Illinois, and then a trip out to Oregon, talking about them finishing at 2-1 through those three games. And then they come home for a homecoming game against Michigan State, which will be another really good test against the Jonathan Smith-led football team. And that game will be a huge game because we'll talk about Aiden Childs being in year 2 there for Michigan State. Then we've got UCLA coming in, Tino Sunseri coming back home to Indiana with his new quarterback, Nico Amalivant. And after that, a trip East Coast to Maryland to take on Mike Loxley and his ball club after that gauntlet. So to say that this is somewhat of a let-up would be a mistake, because every game after every Big Ten team that next week is the most important game on the schedule, and they are all big in the Big Ten, as we understand here on the Hoosier Tailgate. Tonight, we are going to have Zach Browning joining us here just shortly, talk about camp practices. We've got 2 in after the report date. He was out on the West Coast with the media day out in Vegas too, so we may ask him a couple of questions about that, even though that was over a week ago. But he's been out both practices thus far, so we may get a report initially on what it's been the last couple of days out there. And yeah, Jason, the big spittoon rivalry with Michigan State. So anytime you got a rivalry game, throw out the records, you never know what could happen. But we appreciate you being here tonight. If you have any questions, we fully ask that you participate. Do me a big favor. Like, comment, and subscribe for us there on the Hoosier.com YouTube page as well. Follow us along on X at Hoosier Tailgate. And if you like to watch or listen to podcasts and you follow us on the Apple platform or Spotify, and we just got hooked up to iHeartRadio, but on Spotify and Apple, if you could go over there and like our podcast page and leave a rating along with a little comment or two, greatly helps us over there as well in terms of any algorithm that would single out, Indiana football as we, make a quest to be the best source for all things Indiana football here at the tailgate, and as well as the Hoosier.com. So if you could help us with that, we would greatly appreciate that. And like I said, we'll get into a little bit later on the next 3 games of the conference that will be on tap here after that big 3-week gauntlet that the Hoosiers will face right after facing Indiana State at home. We talked about the already the camp underway. We're done with practice 2 in the books. We'll get Zach's take on it thus far. Not too much to overly report, but you get a taste for it in that regard. What's happening right now? Up so far, the Indiana Hoosiers have racked up numerous preseason award watch lists for many of the defense and even the offense. The Nagurski Award, I believe it's 3 Indiana Hoosiers are on that list. You've got that group of Kamara, Fisher, and Pons as being a big group. Then throw over to Surratt being on a couple lists. And so far, Indiana has placed as many as 3 on the list, on many different watch lists, which is not something that's happened overly too much for Indiana over the years. Thus far, Robert, let's see here. You want to know when the homecoming game is? That is against Michigan State on the 18th. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. But a lot of honors for the Hoosiers, and Zach has that all covered too over there on the Hoosier.com. Remember, get that subscription. $1 for the first month, 50% off for the rest of the year. That deal will be going away shortly, and you don't want to miss it because of all the coverage that takes place there by Zach, Colin, McMahon, Drew, Kyler, you name it. They got you covered with everything and anything Indiana athletics in that respect. So, we'll talk about this a little bit later about the USA Today writer and some SEC media that have just still can't let 2024 go in the Indiana Hoosiers and jumped on Sig's comments at Media Day about adopting the SEC philosophical approach to scheduling. This one, I just call him what he is, dipshit, who doesn't really understand what he's talking about, discussing that and talking about how Indiana's non-conference schedule is a joke compared to other SEC teams. And this guy failed to really investigate that the vast majority of the SEC, as well as other conferences, P4 conferences, normally play 2 G5 schools, and usually 1 FCS school. Now, SEC, they play 8 conference games, so they pick up an extra non-conference game. What they've done with that is scheduled games with the Big 12 and the ACC, and dressed it up, called it a conference game, even though it's not within the conference. And since the Big 10 plays 9 and everybody else plays 8, Sig was correct. We're just going to play 2 G5s in the FCS school for our non-conference game because we play 9 Big 10 games while everybody else plays 8. Well, that got into the ire of many of the media out there, including print media, as well as talk show hosts in and around the country, especially South, and they didn't quite like the take of Coach Sig's philosophy and still pointed to last year's 11-1 season of being a fluke. So, again, we'll come back to that a little bit later. Other thing, yesterday on Jim Coyle's show, he was talking about the Hoosier Ticket Project and everything that goes into that group and organization in terms of what they are and what they stand for. But they make young kids' dreams come true and take the burden off families on being able to pay for tickets to go to see a basketball game or go to see an Indiana football game. And so those that have season tickets and maybe not be able to use some games, they ask that if you want to donate to them, they can make sure they're utilized. Or if you want to just give a cash donation, you can do that as well. So that being said, we're going to get Zach in here and get him rocking and rolling with us here, if I can do the correct thing tonight, and bring him in. Let's see. To right. Nope, we'll do something else because I screwed that up already. Oh, Zach, me and my inability to operate this board at times is quite amazing. So we're going to do it like that.
Here.
Drag and drop, baby. That's how you do it. Drag and drop.
There we go.
Again, if anybody out there is hearing an echo because we will not hear it, let us know so that we can make corrections with it. What I found out last week when our other gentleman was on last week, he didn't have his headsets in, and therefore we picked up a lot of feedback, and that's why I said, don't forget your headsets. Very typical. Oh, Robert says we're getting an echo. Can you believe it? Well, we're going to try this out real quick. I do not know what is going on with this at all. So let me try to get some things switched around here with this situation because it's driving me crazy. And I do not know why. And let's see, is there still an echo with that out there in our chat rooms?
Am I echoing?
I don't think you are, but if you have echo cancellation that you can implement on your side of the equation, that would be great as well. We've been having some issues of late, and I don't understand it because we weren't having any of these issues earlier, and all of a sudden now we're picking them up for some reason. And sometimes I've got to kick on the echo cancellation aspect of things and making sure that we've got that taken care of. But I don't, is anybody else picking up an echo in our chat when I or Zach speak? Go ahead, Zach, say something.
Hello. Am I echoing? I'm happy to be here, but hopefully I'm not echoing.
Sometimes it's the room as well, but don't worry about that. We can't have all the aspects of the room. Well, we're going to carry on, and if I see it, I know another way to handle it, and we'll take care of it that way by muting and things of that nature. So, Zach, I appreciate you being here with me. I wish things would go smoothly every once in a while. Now we're clear. So there you go. But day number 2 in the books for Indiana. I know that you went out to Media Day as well, covered that for the Hoosier.com. We may circle back to that, but that's kind of in some respects a little bit of old news. But first 2 days in the books now, and I know they had to move inside for rain purposes later this afternoon. But why don't you speak a little bit to the last 2 days of practices? Because first day they're in helmets and shorts for the most part. I think were they in that again today? Just helmets and shorts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
You don't really get to see much other than guys running around in their underwear. But why don't you go ahead and give a brief backup, synopsis of the last 2 days there on campus?
Yeah, so day one, obviously, as you mentioned, just kind of helmets, shorts, the kind of crimson practice jerseys that they wear. I think that'll be probably the first 4 or 5 fall camp practices, and then they'll start putting on pads and start getting a little bit more serious. Obviously, no heavy hitting or anything like that, but start actually putting on some pads here in the next week or so. But yeah, this has been the same old for Indiana, which I think is exactly what people want and what you want if you're Cincinnati in this type of situation. You went to the college football playoff last year. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. There was nothing really
Mm-hmm.
that needed to change from a fall camp, pretty much how that kind of operated from that perspective. It's still business as usual. The practices are snappy. I will say one of the changes yesterday, Cincinnati decided to take a shower before he came down and talked to us. That was different from last year. Last year, he'd come right back down after practice, but I think that Wednesday was just a little bit too hot outside and decided to take a shower before coming down to talk to us. But overall, I think everything's pretty much the same. You still see the intensity from each of the position group coaches. Signetti is there kind of in the middle of the field, stalking everything, scanning to both sides, just making sure everything's being run smoothly. I will say this year, I don't know if I can't remember back to last year, but this year I've noticed maybe some of the position coaches being even more active in the drill work. I saw Pat Kuntz earlier today. He was working with a defensive lineman, and he was actually visibly showing himself at modeling the drill. He wasn't having anybody else do that. I believe last year it was guys like Mikhail Kamara. He would tell them what the drill was. They would then model that drill to the rest of the guys. But
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this year especially, I saw Pat Kuntz do it. I think I saw Bryant Haynes get down in a 3-point stance at one point in practice today. I've seen John Miller, the running backs coach, run a couple of drills. But I think the intensity is there. I think that this team, the expectations might be higher. The mindset's kind of the same. This is still the same old Indiana team, the same team that is going to go into this mindset blocking out all the noise. But I definitely think there's a little bit more of a swagger to the team, not arrogance,
Yeah.
confidence. And I know they were confident last year. They were confident about themselves. But I think there's a little bit more of that swagger. Kirsten Knight's always had that swagger. You date back to last year's media days. He's always kind of had that swagger. But I think it started to rub off on the players and on the program even more so. You walk around, guys kind of have that hop in their step more so than they even did last year when they went on to win 11 games, obviously. But I think there's just a little bit more swagger, a little bit more confidence, a little bit more sense of belonging for this Indiana team heading into 2025 season. And fall camp has been what you'd hope it would be and what you would expect through 2 days with them just wearing helmets.
Yeah, and we all know that some of that swagger comes from the standpoint is the guys have to take up Coach Signetti and have his back when he makes comments in media day about the SEC scheduling philosophy, or he sometimes is taken too literally in his comments, but that kind of comes across that way. That's kind of his personality and such. But again, that's what winning does for you, right? I mean, winning kind of breeds that swagger when you're coming off that successful of a season, 11-1, going to the college football playoffs, kind of Americans' darling, so to speak, last year with what they were able to accomplish, that now they come in with a lot of confidence, and that expectation is not, a wish and a hope mentality, but an expectation to do things in a way that is consistent. It's fast, physical, relentless. It's all the things that Sig likes to talk about. So I can understand that mindset of the players and even those that are coming in, because that's all they know is winning. And it's kind of a great thing to have, because I've been on the other side when you're losing, and it's not a great sign to set, because a lot of guys fake it through those time periods. But there's no question that this roster, and you've written exclusively about it, I know Colin has, and some of the other guys there. But when I got the national awards list before we came on, Maxwell Award, that's the outstanding overall player. You got Mendoza and Surratt on that. Outland Trophy, which goes to the interior lineman, that has Carter Smith on it. Nagurski Trophy, which basically is a symbol for the National Defensive Player of the Year. That has Fisher, Kamara, and Pounds on it. Indiana was one of the few teams that had 3 guys listed in that a list. Thorpe Award for Best Defensive Back, of course, that's Mr. Pons, and the Buckus Award, Aiden Fisher. So while these are some repeats of guys that have been around over the last year, they weren't on the Lee's list a year ago. But have you ever seen a time where Indiana had a multitude of guys listed in preseason watch list on a national variety of opportunities to be in that group of elite players?
No, I have not, and I think it's just more than those type of guys that we're kind of mentioning. You obviously think of Aiden Fisher, D'Angelo Pons, Mikhail Kamara on the defense, and you're talking about these preseason watch lists. But Elijah Surratt has garnered a lot of recognition as
Yeah.
one of the top 2 or 3 best receivers in the Big Ten, one of the top 5 to 10 best receivers in the entire country. There's been a lot of talk on him. Fernando Mendoza, obviously, we had that story up, I think it was earlier this month, about him being a potential first-round pick next year. D'Angelo Pons, a potential first-round pick next year as well. There is talent. I think we've all kind of agreed and come to a consensus, everybody collectively around the IU sphere, that this team is probably a little bit more talented than last year's team, which is hard to say because last year's team won 11 games and went to the college football playoff. But I do think on paper, when you take everything aside, you strip everything down, and you just look kind of at the talent alone, this team probably has more talent. So if Kurt Cincinnati, which we know that he is good at doing this, if he can get the maximum out of his players, if he can get the most out of this group, then the sky really is the limit. It's something that Mikhail Kamara said at Media Days. He said the sky really is the limit for us. They think that they can compete. They know that they can compete based on last year, but it's just talent up and down the roster. You look offensively at quarterback, Fernando Mendoza. That's evident. I'll add from fall camp the past couple of days, the deep ball is as advertised. It's just spectacular.
Yeah.
Off the wrong foot, off the back foot, rolling to his left, rolling to his right. There's not a ball 30-plus yards down the field that he can't make. You look in the running back room, Lee Beebe hasn't been practicing so far in fall camp, but Kaylon Black, uber talented. Roman Himby, obviously, Indiana fans saw him score a touchdown against IU for Maryland last year in Memorial Stadium. He's had near 1,000-yard seasons at the Big Ten level. Elijah Surratt, he speaks for himself at wide receiver. E.J. Williams is another guy, and I'll get more into this as fall camp goes along. I plan on asking some more offensive players as we get them in personality, as we get them further into fall camp, just about E.J. Williams, because, that was kind of an awkward situation last year with he was leaving, but he wasn't leaving. Then he came back. He wanted to transfer. He wanted a redshirt, but Cincinnati didn't really want him to redshirt. It was an awkward situation, kind of a messy situation, but now he's back, and this is probably the healthiest he's been heading into a season in 2, 3, 4 years, maybe even in his entire college career. And he's out there. He caught a 35-yard pass from Fernando Mendoza yesterday down the sideline. He's looked good, and I think E.J. Williams might even be flying under the radar. I mean, the talent never leaves. This was a guy that was a 4 or 5-star recruit, one of the top receivers in his recruiting class. The talent doesn't go away. He just hasn't necessarily been healthy enough to showcase that talent. But all this to say, on paper, I do think this team is probably more talented than last year, and I think that is why these expectations are so high. You look at the defense, there's Byron Baldwin, a 4-star recruit. A lot of the defensive back freshmen, the younger guys, don't look like freshmen. I mean, D'Angelo Pons isn't a good measuring stick because he's 5'9", 170. But there's like 4 or 5 freshman defensive backs that are all just towering over him when they're running through those drills. And I get D'Angelo Pons isn't big, but he's well built. He's strong and sturdy at that size. But some of those defensive back freshmen are big guys. The defensive line, people have been raving about kind of the incoming transfers along that defensive front. So, again, on paper, this team is talented. On paper, this team might even be better than last year's team, but only time will tell. In fall camp, you can kind of get a sense that they know they're good, and they're just ready to prove it on Saturdays or Fridays, depending on what week you're talking about.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with the assessment of, this group on paper. When you look at it objectively at each position group, it's hard to say which group is, I guess, a little light in the talent area. I mean, linebacker is an obvious choice because you lose Walker, who had a phenomenal year last year, but they played as two other guys at that position, significant snaps last year, Hardy being one of them. And depending on how that goes, if those guys step in and take right off, you may not even miss a Walker in the lineup on that side of the ball. Secondary's vastly improved, just not only through recruiting, but transfers as well. I saw the article up on Hoosier today about Sharp and his preparation and how well he's handled the challenge of bringing in some talented corners, and basically coaching staff challenging him. If you want to be the guy, you're going to have to earn it. And they brought in two legit guys. So these are all things that make Indiana a better team, is the competition in and around them. And then E.J. Williams, we could sit here and talk about E.J. Williams until we're blue in the face. And I've always said, he's so talented as a player, and he's such a mismatch problem on the outside. The problem with him is keeping him out of the training room. And that goes a little bit hand in hand on how he's handled the offseason, because I'm not quite sure he's handled the offseason the way he should be handling it in terms of preparation. But also, he's one of those guys that you may not get his best in practice, and that just is not a great recipe for Coach Cignetti. I mean, that's ultimately what hurt McCauley after he got hurt. He was kind of in the doghouse per se, and now he's at Michigan, of course, but there's an expectation on how you're to practice. And I think that was probably what you're seeing from EJ. I'm guessing some maturity has crept into the equation as well. And the fact that, hey, you've got one more year. If you want to go on to the next level, you're going to have to compete at a level that you haven't been at for a couple of years. So there's no question. What is the situation with BB, though? I had not heard that he was not practicing. Do you know?
They haven't given us anything official, anything specific like that. I'm not sure they probably will. He's been in kind of the practice jersey, that cream and crimson, just regular practice jersey. He's been, if you didn't know, if you weren't seeing any of the drills and you just lined all the guys up kind of in a line, you would not think that he wasn't practicing or wasn't participating. He just hasn't really been going through the drills. I did make a note, though, if you are at thehoosier.com, at the Hoosier on 3, I did make a note in our forums today, some observations that despite not participating in these drills, BB is still active. He's still an active participant verbally and with his voice in these drills. I saw him cracking a couple of jokes earlier today. He and Justice Ellison, I think, have a pretty strong relationship. I know Coach Ellison, he's very businesslike, especially in practice, but I think Lee Beebe kind of gets them to crack a couple of smiles here and there during practice time, when Justice would typically want to be a little bit more serious than he is. But I think Lee Beebe has been active, not on the field, obviously. He's not been a participant, and I'm not sure why. We'll see if we can get a chance to ask at some point. But he's still been active. He's still been there. He's still been walking the sidelines. He's still been watching all the drills, getting teaching from John Miller, Justice Ellison as well. But we'll see. I don't think Beebe is too much of a concern heading into week 1 in a little under a month, but we'll see as fall camp goes along.
Have you got a sense of any type of rotation at maybe the defensive line, or are they just pretty much right now rolling them pretty equally in and out of there, because they've got some guys that, they go at least, if you use a 4-man front philosophy, at least 8 deep total, 6 deep for just a 3-man front. But have you sensed anything there with, the Walker from Maryland? And you have the other guys, Hosa Wheeler in that equation. Daly is from Kent State, I believe. Anything on that front from your perspective that you've, noticed or not noticed?
I'm not sure. They've kind of rotated heavily throughout the last 2 days in fall camp practice. The obvious is Mikhail Kamara's kind of been the leader. He kind of leads the drills. He leads off every drill. Then after him, there's not like a clear cut, this guy goes second in every drill or anything like that, or this guy's consistently in the middle. I will say, if you had to pick a guy that's probably definitely going to start on the interior at one of the 2 spots in there, Tyreek Tucker will definitely start at one of the interior spots this year. I think Tucker, I mean, I talked to Mikhail Kamara at Media Days last week, and he said that Tyreek has looked like a little bit of a different animal. I think Tyreek Tucker is coming in this season with a little bit more of a chip on his shoulder, and Mikhail Kamara kind of touched on this a little bit in Las Vegas last week too, that he's got big shoes to fill, Tyreek Tucker. I mean, you
Yeah.
lose C.J. West, you lose James Carpenter, and Tyreek Tucker, he's got to come in, and he can't let that position group fall off at all. He's got to come in, and he's got to be at their caliber of player, and those are two all-conference, guys that are now in the
Yeah.
NFL, and Carpenter and West. So he's got to come in. I think he's playing with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder to try and come in and kind of dominate like they did last year. And then on the outside, I think there will be a healthy rotation. I know Hosea Wheeler will play probably on the inside. I think I wouldn't be surprised if he's kind of that tandem inside that with Tucker. As far as outside, Daly, I think, is probably just by word of mouth. I think that talking with Pat Coogan today, he said that Daly's been a positive. I think Dominic Ratcliffe will probably slide more interior.
Mm-hmm.
Daly was also somebody that Kamara brought up last week at Media Days. I think Kellen Wyatt, too. You talked about the Maryland guy. I
Wyatt.
think he'll
Yeah.
probably play. I think his best plan of action will probably be to play that edge rusher spot opposite of Kamara when Kamara is slid over at stud. I think that's probably when he'll see most of his action. But other than that, you've got probably not looking at many of the freshmen. I know Mario Landino's another guy to throw in there. He can probably play a little bit outside if you really wanted to, and we're in a pinch, but he'll probably stay home on the interior a little bit more. But those are probably the guys I've been circling. Obviously, you've got Kamara, then Daly, Ratcliffe, Tucker, Landino,
Mm-hmm.
Keyshawn Calhoun maybe a little bit, but Wyatt as well. So those are the guys I'd
Yeah.
circle on the defensive front. Like those are probably who you're going to see out there week one, getting the majority of snaps.
Yeah. Wyatt is a young man that I think they may have stole one, in my opinion. Now, against Indiana last year, I think he had a sack and 2 pass breakups against Indiana, which, that was a pretty good day's effort on his part. But, yeah, I think there's no question. Tucker, the way he played last year, and now he's getting that opportunity to be the guy. He knows that he's got to produce because he's got guys breathing down his neck. Again, I can't stress enough how competition at positions make a huge difference in your overall makeup of a club. IU has never had the depth that they've needed to create the competition that elevates play. And quite honestly, there's been some guys that have known that, and they've coasted in their playing days here because they were better than anybody else at that position, and there was not anybody there to challenge them. Well, now you're bringing in, like you said, 4-star kids, 5-star kids that are at, other institutions, and all of a sudden, you better not mess around too much, get injured or anything. You'll lose your spot, and that's just the way it is. That's why you get better like you have. How about on the offensive side of the football? When you talk about the offensive line, I guess the first thing is it's a pretty big offensive line on paper. Do you get that sense of that impressiveness of looking like a Big Ten offensive line when they're out there on the field?
Yeah, it certainly does not look like an Indiana offensive line of old. There's just a different. It's kind of a microcosm for the team. I talked about the swagger. They know they are a power conference offensive lineman along that front. There's no guys that are Indiana recruits that are 3-star guys that probably wouldn't play many other places in the Big Ten. These are guys that are from Notre Dame and spent a season starting at Notre Dame, or spent a season maybe not starting, but being in the rotation and factoring in at Ohio State or Colorado if you're Khalil Benson. Obviously, Carter Smith, his resume speaks for itself at this point. But I would say along the offensive line, there's probably 6 guys to fill 5 spots. Day one of fall camp practice, I think it was Khalil Benson that was the odd man out, if I remember correctly,
Yep.
from left to right. From left to right for day one of fall camp practice, it was Carter Smith at left tackle, Drew Evans left tackle, who by the way, looks 100% healthy after that Achilles injury. Pat Coogan at center, Bray Lynch at right guard, and at right tackle was Zen Mahalski. So I think Khalil Benson may end up being the odd man out amongst that kind of top group of 6. But the thing with Benson that he brings is versatility, because he can line up outside, he can line up inside, pretty much
Yes.
outside of center. he can probably play any position along that offensive line. So if that's your sixth guy, if somebody needs a breather or somebody gets hurt, if that's the guy you're bringing in, and he's got that much versatility, I think you're probably in a good spot. But I mean, like every team really in the Big Ten outside of maybe Ohio State and Penn State, injuries would obviously impact kind of the strength and how you kind of view this offensive line. But healthy, this is one of the better units in the Big Ten on paper. And again, it's just a bunch of guys that look like they belong in the Big Ten. I mean, Carter Smith,
Yeah.
obviously, Drew Evans and Bray Lynch came on last year at IU. They proved they kind of belong in the Big Ten. Pat Coogan just started on a team that was the national runner-up. And Zen Mahalski, again, wasn't a huge factor necessarily throughout his career at Ohio State. But if you're going through 2-3 years of training and working with Ohio State and Columbus, you're probably ready to play offensive line in the Big Ten. So, yeah, I think those would kind of be the guys, that top six. Again, probably six guys to fill five spots. But I think it'll be interesting to kind of see how they kind of rotate and use that versatility they have up there throughout the season.
Speaking with Zach Browning here from the Hoosier.com and covering the first 2 days of the Hoosiers practice of the 2025 fall camp and kind of, dissecting some things here with this group of Hoosiers. If you got a question, maybe for Zach, by all means, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll get to it if I see it, of course, and try to get you an answer if it's something that we either him or I can answer. But I appreciate Zach coming on tonight and giving his intake of kind of what has transpired here over the first 2 days of camp. Right now, I would say Indiana would be listed as a healthy ball club with the amount of people that are back and participating, like you just related to Lynch, Evans. Those guys had some injuries, and Khalil Benson had an injury in the spring that kept him out of spring, but he's out there and going. And some other guys that may have been nursing an injury here or there. Let's get to the $64,000 question. We've got, I think the biggest question is how good is Alberto, and is he ready to conquer his brother's position and give him a run for his money? But no, Fernando, you talked about earlier, making some throws that, overly impressed you, I guess I would say, from your response, that he was able to make some throws that maybe we haven't seen around Indiana for a couple years. How has he looked thus far in the start of the seasonal practices and stuff?
Yeah, he's looked like QB1. He's looked like Fernando Mendoza. He's got a helmet on most of the time, but when he doesn't have that helmet on, whether it's getting a drink or wiping off his face with the towel, he's pretty much always smiling. He seems like he just enjoys football and enjoys being out there. And that's the kind of vibe you get when you talk to him. He's a really smart guy. I think Pat Coogan today touched on it and hit it pretty well. He's really smart. He kind of understands the game. He understands how things work. He understands the system. And I think now through spring, through the summer, now into the fall, he's got a good grip on that offense, because that's really what made Curtis Rourke stand out last season. Curtis obviously dealing with a torn ACL. Fernando's going to be much more mobile and much more athletic than Curtis Rourke. But what Rourke just excelled at was he just understood exactly what decision to make at exactly every right moment, no matter what the situation was. And I think if Fernando can get to that point mentally, physically, I mean, there's not many quarterbacks. You can maybe count on one hand how many quarterbacks are more physically gifted than Fernando Mendoza. We kind of joke about it on the sidelines, a couple of the media guys at practice, that Alberto kind of got the short end of the stick genetically because Fernando Mendoza, he's a good 3-4 inches bigger than his brother. He's a good 20, 25 pounds heavier than his brother. Alberto, I think, will be a great quarterback. He's probably going to be the QB2 this year for IU, and I think Indiana would be in good hands there. But it's just there's not many physical specimens in the college level right now like Fernando Mendoza. Again, it's just every practice, every couple of reps, he just makes a throw that's like, wow, we are going to be seeing that on Sundays in a year or two. So it's just kind of that situation. And I think another thing that stood out, we've already seen the mobility. It was kind of maybe not this point yet, but in the next couple of practices by this time last year, that Curtis Rourke kind of had that brace. And again, none of us knew that it was a torn ACL, but you could kind of tell he was maybe hindered a little bit last year during fall camp. He kind of had that brace on. no brace for Fernando Mendoza. He looks spry. He's rolling out of the pocket. He's making throws off his back foot. He's extending plays. He's doing all those kinds of things that Indiana necessarily didn't have last year because of Rourke's ACL injury. So I think for Mendoza, it's all about the mental side of things. Can his decision making, can his poise in the pocket, can his understanding of how to read defenses, if that can come close to what Curtis Rourke was able to do last year, I think the physical tools will carry him so far and will lead this team to some pretty great things this year because, again, there's just not many from a physicality standpoint, from a body type standpoint, athleticism, there's just not many college quarterbacks around the country doing and that can do what Fernando can do.
Well, and the other thing is, as his mobility and being able to implement some quarterback runs here and there, as well as move the pocket, is going to hurt teams that, like to bring pressure. And last year could bring pressure because Curtis was more a true pocket thrower. And last year they had to win it on the outside, and the back shoulder throw became the apparatus of what they did when teams really lit them up and played man on the outside. Now, Curtis is probably one of the better quarterbacks I've seen throw a back shoulder throw as consistently as he did last year and high in accuracy. I think this year, I think the biggest thing that separated Curtis outside of the smarts of things was his ability to make the throws and do it in a consistent fashion and accuracy. His accuracy was spot on all year. And that will be, Mendoza. Can he be as accurate of a thrower, whether it's short, medium, or intermediate type of routes, and then the deep ball, as Curtis was? And if he can be, then on top of what you add to the equation from his mobility, you're correct. I think there's no question he's going to be a step up in the improvement department overall. So the other thing, and I'm sure they've worked on it, and it probably hasn't came up yet, he's got to learn to stand on the pocket longer, because at Cal, he got hammered 41 times. So he's a little gun shy back there. That's one thing that I'm sure they will work on intently through fall camp and have been since, last spring with that. When you look at the other quarterbacks, you talk about Alberto, you got Grant Wilson, who's a kid that came in from Old Dominion, who actually had some pretty good, career at Old Dominion when you really look at him on tape and stuff. What about some of the young guys that they've got true freshmen in right now? Because I believe they've got Bell, who's a true scholarship quarterback, and now they all are. I guess I can't say that anymore, but he was one that they end up going out heavily getting. And then who else do they have there, and what have you seen of some of those young kids?
Yeah, so obviously you've got the top three of Fernando, Alberto, Grant Wilson. Jacob Bell, as you mentioned, if scholarships and walk-ons are still kind of differentiated between the two, Jacob Bell would be considered a scholarship player. Maverick Geske, who is from Indianapolis, probably wouldn't be considered a scholarship player. He's been out there. Jacob Bell too. My thing with those two guys is it's weird to kind of predict the future at the quarterback spot for Indiana because you don't necessarily know, and we don't necessarily know the future of the health of Tyler Cherry at this point. Obviously, Cherry not on the roster this year, but that is as talented of a quarterback recruit as Indiana's really had in recent memory.
Correct.
It's kind of like an EJ Williams situation with Cherry.
Mm-hmm.
The talent is there, just can he get on the field? And I'm not sure if he ever will be able to get on the field, but if he does, he's got all the talent in the world to kind of take over as a quarterback and as a serious player for that number one job for Indiana. And then you look at what Indiana's doing kind of in the recruiting circles. Jacob Bell, next year, if you assume Fernando's probably going to be gone next year after the season, you look at next year, you've got Alberto, who will just be a redshirt sophomore by that stretch, so he's still young. Jacob Bell will be competing, maybe not. It's hard to differentiate between competing for starting job and competing for that kind of backup job next year, but Jacob Bell's got to be in that conversation. The quarterback that's committed in the class of 2026, Cash Herrera, it's unlikely he starts as a true freshman, but that's a three-star guy. And then you look at Jamison Purcell, who's committed out of the 2027 class. He's fringe 3-star, borderline 4-star, right on that kind of cusp between 3 and 4 stars. So I think the future of the Indiana quarterback spot, it's not, I wouldn't say it's up in the air because whoever it is, the bodies are probably in the room. I'm not sure. Maybe Indiana next year goes out and looks for another transfer portal quarterback. That's always an option. But I think Indiana's got talented bodies in the room. You just don't
Mm-hmm.
know whether it's over the course of this season, over the course of next off season, who can kind of separate themselves from each other. Right now, it's probably too early, and I think you got to give the leg up to Alberto Mendoza just because he's kind of been in the offense longer than the rest of the guys at this point. So,
Mm-hmm.
but Indiana has quarterbacks in that room that are talented, and again, Tyler Cherry kind of throws another question mark at you in that room. But I think Indiana, from a quarterback spot, they won't have to go out and get multiple in the portal. That's for sure. That's almost certainly if they want
Right.
to go get a quarterback, if they aren't necessarily super happy with the way Alberto's progressed and they don't think maybe he can handle a starting job next year, maybe you go out and get another one and done transfer, another top rated guy. I mean, Kurt Snetty's had his fair bit of success in the transfer portal with quarterbacks here at IU. So maybe you go out and do that. I think eventually he'd like to have a little bit more of a steady pipeline from the high school ranks, and I think you kind of see that starting really next class with Cash Herrera and then Jamison Purcell in 2027. But I think quarterback-wise, Indiana has flexibility for the future because they have bodies, they have guys that can be a 1, 2, 3 kind of ranked guy in the depth chart in that quarterback room, and they always have that kind of magic, that wild card in their back pocket where they can just say, "Hey, let's go out and get another Curtis Fork or another Fernando Mendoza in the portal."
Well, Zach, I appreciate you coming on tonight, giving us a little feedback on two practices. Is not always simple because you really don't get to truly identify with the hitting and stuff, but appreciate you coming on, and definitely we'll get you back during the year and talk more in depthly as we go through the season. But appreciate you coming on tonight, and we'll catch you down the road, buddy.
Yeah, thank you. I'm always happy to be here. Love talking Indiana football with you.
All right, Zach Browning from thehoosier.com. We're going to get back right after this message and start in on the next three ball games that Indiana will face on their 2025 schedule here on the Hoosier Tailgate on thehoosier.com.
Hoosier Football Tailgate is sponsored by BetUS. Use promo code TAILGATE and get a 125% sign-up bonus on your first deposit. BetUS is where the game starts.
Welcome back to the Hoosier Tailgate here on thehoosier.com. And we're going to get going here with our discussion points on this next road ahead here in the 2025 schedule. And, last year after the historic season, 11-2 and 24, and in the college football playoffs, the expectations, as we talked with Zach under Kurt Signetti, have been completely reset now. I mean, it's no longer about moral victories. It's not about making a bowl game. The standard is competing with the best of the best week in, week out, and competing for the Big Ten championship, an opportunity to play in it, and also competing for another playoff spot and earning the national respect that you have to earn each and every year. 1 year does not make you a national spotlight team. This is why we discussed last week's three-game stretch against Iowa, Illinois, and Oregon. Now you come up with this next three ball club games against a Michigan State team, as well as UCLA and Maryland. These are going to be the big teeth of that Big Ten schedule that Indiana will face. They will have a bye week prior to going out to Oregon, which will be much needed after going on the road to Iowa. I predicted that they will be a 2-1 club coming off that game gauntlet, 5-1 overall heading into this next stretch of ball games. And I do think when you talk about these next three, with Michigan State being the Rasputin game, you can see why I'm also, optimistic of where Indiana could be there. They're going to face 3 weeks of completely different styles of football. It will demand every bit of focus, resiliency, and old school mentality that Kurt Cignetti preaches. And the other thing is, he wants a team that is ready to go each and every week. And last year, we were always questioning, how would they react when they got themselves in a situation where they got punched in the nose? How would they react? Well, at Ohio State, they didn't react very well after the punt situation that cost them, 10 points or so before the half. That game, they didn't respond very well in that ball game. And how are they going to respond this year with this ball club heading into this Big Ten schedule with Illinois picked fourth in the league? Oregon is picked, second, first, depending on who poll you look at. And Iowa's picked right behind them. So how is this ball club going to, handle adversity when they get themselves in a situation, how are they going to respond to all this and get themselves ready to go? We talked about the how we broke down that last week's 3 games, with Indiana being up a 2-1 finish after those 3 games. And again, they're facing Illinois. You got Brett Bielema and his ball club and what they bring to the table. Going to be even better. You've got Iowa in that equation, new quarterback from the FCS level out of South Dakota State, 2 national championships under his belt as well. And so you're going to have these 3 games that will ultimately bring them right into this rivalry game, first with Michigan State. Homecoming, October the 18th. On the surface, you might see this game likely win for Indiana. Michigan State, though, second year under Jonathan Smith, a rebuild under him after he came in from Oregon State. They really struggled last year to really find anything offensively. Aiden Childs followed him from Oregon State. They finished 5-7, 3-6 in the Big Ten. As you can see, what their prediction is from over-under number of wins, 5-5, and then a conference title odds of being 12,000 plus 12,000. So that they are in the bottom half of the league, I guess you could say, from that standpoint. But again, this rivalry with Indiana goes back to 1922, and it was actually introduced in 1950. And when you think of Big Ten football, you think of rivalries. The one thing that I found in researching Michigan State more deep in terms of this rivalry game, it hasn't been much of a rivalry game, as Michigan State holds a 50-19-2 overall record against Indiana. But Indiana had a big win last year in East Lansing and really fed it to them 47-10. So don't think that game will not factor in to this preparation for this Spartan team. The defense was lights out that game. They held Michigan State to a negative number of yards rushing in that ball game. And that's going to be the one key thing heading into this year's ball game, is what Michigan State will bring to the table coming into Memorial Stadium on October the 18th for a homecoming contest. Jonathan Smith has a record number of coaches with him in terms of how many years they've been with him. Lindgren and Rossi are 2 extraordinary coordinators for Jonathan Smith, and he's He's built winners where he's been at before in Oregon State. He's very methodical, and his approach, his work at Oregon State was impressive. And can he now do it at a better institution like Michigan State where they have more dollars? After last year, they really concentrated in the offseason to become a more physically improved team and avoid being pushed around that they experienced last year. Aiden Child's development will be critical. He had his ups and downs as a first-year starter, but he is a really good talent, strong arm, running ability, but he made too many mistakes last year as a young QB. He's said to have put on some weight and muscle already heading into this season, and ultimately they have to do a better job of protecting him. The biggest thing that they were affected by last year was their inability to run the ball consistently. And in the Big Ten, if you cannot run the football consistently, you're in for a world of hurt, because the more you become one-dimensional, defenses will just pin their ears back. They went to the portal for a lot of help on the offensive line and at running back. They want to be a team that controls the line of scrimmage and the clock, and ultimately against Indiana, keep their offense on the sideline. Joe Rossi is a very good defensive coordinator, but he's still working on an identity there in East Lansing, because he's one of those defensive guys that wants a tough, physical ball club and be able to go at the quarterback. Their pass rush last year was subpar with only 19 sacks, and so that will be a focus for this team in 2025. They did add some help along the defensive line, like linebacker Wayne Matthews is back, and quarterback Chance Rucker is back to step up. Ideally, what they're going to try to do Indiana's offense is find ways to slow them down, is the way I see it. And how they do that, they're going to have to find ways to get after Mendoza. Being at that this game's at home and his homecoming will be a big deal for Indiana and a tough sled for Michigan State. I guess the biggest thing that we talked about last week, and we will talk about this week and all through the season, is Indiana's football team being able to play what we call complementary football on both sides of the football. Offense and defense in unison. Defense getting the ball for the offense, and the offense putting points on the board. Indiana did that with great ease last year, and again, will be a key for them this year, especially off turnovers, where they can get points off of turnovers, which they were, I think, second in the conference in that category a year ago. I do think their defense will be able to shut the run game down again. Will they be able to hold them under, negative yardage? We'll have to see. But Aiden Childs is a quarterback that can not only throw the football, he has a quarterback that is threatened to be involved in a quarterback run game, and he can move the pocket. As for Mendoza, again, it's going to come down to, is his accuracy and his ability to make plays down the field as consistently as Curtis Rourke did a year ago in this offense? Can he replicate that and be a guy that Indiana can get overly productive plays from him by adding in the run game in all this? That's the other thing that you may want to be able to see with them. In last year's game with this group, it was a slugfest in that first half or so, but Indiana steamrolled them after that in a very decisive win, 47-10. But Aiden Childs, as we see him here in some of the highlights from last year, these are the type of throws this young man can make. And he is a very talented kid in and out of the pocket. There's no question that his ability to make plays is there. It's just that he consistently had trouble doing it a year ago. I do think this game's going to be a lot closer than it was a year ago in some respects. There's no question that Michigan State's got Indiana circled on the calendar because of the embarrassment that Indiana gave them up in East Lansing in front of their home crowd. But this is a game that Indiana's defense and the creativity of Coach Shanahan will be too much for Michigan State. And I do think this is a ball game that Indiana will win a homecoming victory against Michigan State in Bloomington. So again, a very difficult team that we're going to see here in terms of what Jonathan Smith likes to do. But there's no game on Indiana's schedule this year that has as much fanfare as the game against UCLA that will have Tino coming back to town and Deshaun Foster in his second year. 5-5 is their game that they will over under is. They were 5-7 last year, improved as the year went on, 3-6 in the Big Ten. Deshaun Foster's second year at UCLA. As for what they bring back, again, offensively and defensively, I do think they will be an improved ball club. And I do think that this game will be a challenging game because Tino understands Indiana's defense, having gone against it for 2 years, and the fact that he understands what Indiana likes to do in terms of what they do on defensively, especially Bryant Haynes. And they've got a pretty good quarterback in Nika Amalivan, who's over from Tennessee. Now, this young man can be every bit as good as anybody in the country, but he can also be a big pain in the you-know-what. And reports out of Tennessee was that the father was a complete disaster in terms of working, undermining Josh Heupel, and things of that nature. But definitely a talented kid with a lot of ability. Tino in his first year, their D coordinator was there against Indiana last year on a game that many people didn't give Indiana a chance to win. They went out to the Rose Bowl and put one on them last year. And that ball game was the first game I would say showed Indiana to be a very, very respectable ball club. And that's when heads started turning on what they did to UCLA out in UCLA. And you can see that UCLA is, again, they've got Berger back in the running back room as well as Killmeyer in the receiving room. They got Flores, Pedersen back. So they got some good guys back. They did graduate a lot on defense. So this is a team that Indiana will, have to be ready for them come second week after the Ohio State or Michigan State games. But, Indiana was on the entire game out in California against UCLA. And like I said, they surprised the world last year in doing what they did to UCLA out in the Rose Bowl. And not too many people thought Indiana was going to be able to do what they did to first-year Big Ten member UCLA and Coach Foster. Indiana's defense was good. They capitalized off of turnovers, interceptions at key points of the game. you name it, they were able to do a lot of that last year out in Brentwood. The last game on this 3-game stretch, and not to get ahead of myself here, but I do think they beat UCLA at home. I do think UCLA kind of gives them some trouble, but I do think Indiana overall is a much better ball club, A to Z, than UCLA, and will pull away in that ball game. When you look at the next game, Maryland, Coach Loxley. Again, Coach Loxley is a very good football coach. He's run into some problems there last year at Maryland. You know, he even said it in the Big Ten media days, is that he lost his ball club in the locker room. He did not do a very good job coaching, and he has vowed to correct that, even saying he will move his office into the locker room if needed, because he will not lose this ball club this year. I would say he's a coach that's on the hot seat. He made some wholesale changes on both sides of the football, so he brought in new offense and defensive coordinators, and he's a very good offensive coach, and they got a new quarterback coming in, and if they can sync, they can be very dangerous as an offense because of what they like to do in the spread offense. But last year, 4-8, 1-8 in the Big Ten. Very surprising of them last year and how they finished in the season last year, because it was just completely unexpected. And Indiana did a great job with that ball game in Bloomington last year on a rainy day. And again, it was just another game that put a feather in the cap of the Hoosiers as it pertained to national attention and prominence. But Pep Hamilton is their new offensive coordinator. He has ties to the NFL. Of course, he was at the Colts for a while. Stanford as others, and Monchino, their defensive coordinator, his first year as well at Maryland. But you can see that gave up way too many points and yards last year. And like I said, I do think Coach Locke is on the hot seat when it comes to his job security this year, and he will not be able to have a game where he is 4-8, 5-7 again, because that will not be good enough at Maryland. Now, they've put some money into the program, as you see Wyatt right there, the guy that's transferring and playing for Indiana, getting the sack against Curtis Rourke. But they will have a young quarterback involved in their offense this year, and a defense that will face some challenges as far as what they have coming back and what they will need on defense. So they lose the experience on offense, and they had some graduations on defense. And this game last year wasn't the best first quarter that Curtis Rourke put together, but ultimately at the end of the day, Indiana wins against Maryland and did a great job of playing complimentary football on this rainy day there in Bloomington. But Curtis had 2 interceptions back-to-back in this ball game that shocked the Hoosier faithful. And everybody was kind of caught off guard that all of a sudden he's thrown 2 picks. Does he not have it or not? But he got on track, and Indiana, again, opened it up with some great plays down the field, all the different passes that he was able to make during this game, especially the back shoulder throw stuff to Surratt. And, you know, they did a great job in this ball game. But that game required them to play complimentary football, which they did, to get that win last year against Maryland. And this year, I do believe, again, that they will win this ball club, but it will be tough going on the road to Maryland in an environment that has not been very friendly to Indiana at all. But I do believe that Indiana will find their road wheels, so to speak, midway in that second half of the game and find a way to win it out in Maryland. And I do believe this 3-game schedule will find them a 3-0 record with only having one loss heading into a national game versus Penn State, which could be a huge, huge ball game that will be in Happy Valley against the Nittany Lions. And if they can do that and go into this game with only one loss in hand, be 8-1 heading into the Nittany Lion game, they have a great chance to have another opportunity to get in the college football playoffs. But as anything, they have to prove it between the light lines. Predictions and opinions mean nothing. It's what you do in between the white lines and what the scoreboard says at the end of the game that makes all the difference in the world. So Indiana, by far, will have the opportunity to be 8-1 heading into the game against Penn State. Well, how do you guys feel? By all means, drop it what you think down in the comments section. I'll always take a look and try to respond to anyone that leaves a comment. Again, remember, if you could head over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave me a review, I would greatly appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell there on the Hoosier on 3 YouTube page, so you know when you have a video that drops here from myself or anyone else a part of the Hoosier on 3 family. And again, I want to thank you for being here tonight. And it went a little bit longer than I like to, but again, when you have somebody like Zach willing to come on and give you some juicy details of practice, even though it's been only 2 days, you take advantage of that and you find out what is going on in Bloomington and how's it going. And I could say by his tempered enthusiasm, I think he believes Indiana is going to be a pretty darn good ball club. And thus far, he's getting that vibe from a club that understands how to win and understand what it takes to win. So next week, join me right back here at 7:30 as we continue on with this 2025 schedule breakdown. We'll cover the next 3 ball games for the Hoosiers heading up into that end of the year game against Purdue, a game that will have a lot of eyes on it since Indiana hammered them last year. And then of Coach Odom throwing some shade towards Indiana. We'll find out about what he brings to the table there at Purdue, having come there from UNLV, but was at Missouri prior to that. So we'll talk about all those 3 games. This is next week at 7:30. Remember, each and every week I'm on with Jim Coyle on Thursdays as well. Catch me there, and as I and Jim will talk over a lot of different topics about Indiana football. And there are times where I will host and for Jim. So by all means, look us up over there. Even though this is a football channel, remember that Indiana will get off to Puerto Rico next week to have a 3-game set there with their new ball club, get a chance to kick the tires against the Puerto Rican national team, and then play a couple games against the Serbian national team. So stay tuned to all that coverage on the Hoosier.com as the guys will be down there covering it. There will be no TV or radio of those games down in Puerto Rico, so stick to the Hoosier.com as well as Jim Coyle to give you all the coverage of IU's trip to Puerto Rico. Again, thank you for being with me here tonight. We'll see you next Thursday night. I'm the coach, Shannon Griffith, and this has been the Hoosier Football Tailgate here on thehoosier.com. Good night, everybody.